Hi, I'm Dr. April Grothy, and today we're going to be talking about the Practical Guide, Content Analysis. So we're going to be talking about designing an analysis, and there's 3 ways to enter that design, and that's text-driven, problem-driven, and method-driven. Then we're going to talk about writing a research proposal, then writing a research report, and lastly we're going to use a sample content analysis and show how it followed the research proposal and research report. Text-driven analysis, this is actually our simplest way to enter an analysis, and this is actually motivated by the availability of text that is rich enough to stimulate the analysis interest in the text. And you start by familiarizing yourself with the text. You then catalog and unitize the text. Then you go through and actually carefully read the text and code the text and come up with the results. Problem-driven analysis, this is actually our most lengthy analysis, stepwise, and this is derived from a desire to know something that is currently inaccessible and from the belief that a systematic reading of the potentially available text could provide the answers. So first step here is formulating research questions, and this is in fact key to a successful research design, as well-formulated research questions actually guide your design. Then you want to ascertain stable correlations. This is where you start to consider what the answers to these research questions may in fact be. Then you want to locate relevant texts, so that's doing research yourself or contacting companies, facilities that may have the text that you want to utilize. Then you want to define and identify the relevant units in text. So in this case, if you're talking about a large volume of text, breaking them down into smaller units makes them more manageable. And this really can only be done if the units themselves, if the relationship between the units themselves don't in fact lead to your research, your answers to your research questions. Sampling these units of text. So if the population of the text that you're utilizing is very large, then you can actually break it down into a representative sample that you then utilize. Then you want to develop coding categories and recording instructions, and this step is actually very important, and a great way to make sure that these instructions are correct is in fact by pre-testing them on a small sample of text and making sure that they'll satisfy your reliability, and if not, going back, updating your instructions, and again pre-testing until you in fact are satisfied. You're then going to select an analytical procedure, and the best procedure to select is one that parallels what's going on in the context of the available text. Then you're going to adopt standards, and the standards for the validity should be related to the level of the validity demanded of the results. Lastly, you're going to allocate resources, and this is where you delegate either to those that are helping you with this analysis, or whether you utilize a CATA program to help you with this analysis. This is where you obtain help and utilize resources around you. So our last step here in entering an analysis is the method-driven analysis, and this is where a researcher is hooked on one analytical technique, so they then look for research where their preferred method is applicable. And there's 5 steps here, and those are locating and sampling relevant texts. And in this case, when you're locating text, you're looking for texts that are easily amenable to the processing of your chosen method. Then you want to ascertain stable correlations in the context of these texts, and you're ascertaining whether correlations surrounding the text are compatible with the assumptions built into the chosen method. Then you're going to be preparing the text in method-specific and content-sensitive ways, and this is where you develop recording instruments. Then you're going to be adopting standards or criteria, and in this case, reliability is actually not the issue. What's more important is, in fact, semantic, structural, and functional validities. And lastly, you're going to allocate resources, same as what we talked about for the last method. That's where you're delegating tasks, you're using your kata analysis. So, writing the actual research proposal. And a research proposal spells out the steps that a researcher intends to take and explains why. The rhetorical function of this is that it convinces the sponsors that the proposed research is in fact beneficial to them, and that you as the researcher are in fact capable of delivering what you propose. The contractual function is that once this proposal gets approved, you now have a contractual obligation to finish this research. The results itself cannot be guaranteed before the research is complete, but you do have an obligation to do the research. Then you create an outline for the research proposal, and that is what you as the analysts are going to address. Then you're going to talk about the research questions that you're going to answer by your research. You're going to give the step-by-step description of the procedure that you're going to follow. You're going to talk about what units you may use, what sampling strategies you're going to use, the recording and coding categories, as well as the data language that you're going to utilize. Then you're going to do an assessment of the uncertainties that may likely remain when you're done with this research. You are then going to account for specific time periods and resources needed to complete the proposal. So you're going to give a time frame for when this is going to be done, and if there is in fact any research or resources necessary from your sponsors. Lastly, you're going to list any references that you have for currently cited literature used in this proposal. So the research proposal is geared entirely towards your sponsors, or mainly towards your sponsors. Excuse me. The actual research report is geared more towards your peers, because you want to show what your results are to your peers, have them be able to replicate it if they need to, show in for future reference for future analysis. So in the actual research report, in here you're actually going to write a summary or an abstract of the research. If you have a very big report, then you're going to need a table of contents to actually show where each step is in your report. You want to give a review of the literature and how it pertains to your analysis. Then you want to give a description of your research design that you followed, but you also want to make sure that you include any preparatory research that you did, if there was any complications encountered during your research, and if there were complications, how you solved those problems. You then want to show the text that were sampled, and the data language that was used, the units that you used when sampling the text, your actual coding process. And then lastly, you want to come up with not lastly, but the main point at the end is that you want to come up with your research results. What did you actually find? And then you want to give a self-critical appraisal of those results, not only where things might have been improved by yourself, but also where potentially future research could in fact be improved or expanded upon from this analysis. You want to make sure that you have a complete list of references, as well as an appendix that involves anything else that you want the reader to know. And lastly, it's very important that you make sure that you acknowledge the contributors to your research effort. So that includes your sponsors as well as your team members. So the sample article that I looked at was called "What Are Business Schools Doing for Business Today?" written by the Davids. So in this sample article, we don't have the actual design analysis to work with, but we can actually infer a few things from the way the text is written. So I believe that there are actually 2 points of entry utilized in this text. The first, text-driven, in the very beginning paragraph, they talk about a previous article that was written about the same topic that we're talking about today, and that they were revisiting this previous article for the analysis. So revisiting, they have this text, this previous article, and they're revisiting it. So here we have a text-driven point of entry. In that same paragraph, they talk about a quote from this previous article, and this quote is, "Communication between business academics and the business community appears to be minimal and perhaps even threatening to both parties. Academics have little interest in practitioners and their ideas." So this quote might actually be the problem-driven entry point for this analysis. So we have two possible entry points for this analysis: text-driven, being that they are revisiting this previous article, and also problem-driven, being that they quoted a problem that was found in this previous article. So then we're going to look at the actual research report itself. So in the research report, they did follow most of Krippendorff's guidelines. They had a very well-written abstract. The literature was reviewed well, and it was stated well. They did have a description of the research design that they followed, but there was no discussion as to whether there were any preparatory research or if they encountered any problems with their design. In their description of their research design that they followed, they talked about the units that they used, as well as the coding process. And the units that they utilized were recording and coding units, and they were defined categorically. Following the description of the research design, they did give the results, and they did give a complete list of references, but there was no appendix. Now, whether that be they didn't need an appendix, we don't know. There was also no acknowledgement of contributors to the research effort. We only know that the three Davids, Mr., and Miss David, were, in fact, are listed as our authors of this research. So if we don't know if there was, in fact, any other contributors to this research effort. So an actual content analysis review. So in this, what I did was looked back to the beginning of content analysis, way back to that first PowerPoint presentation that we talked about, where we talked about the 6 categories of content analysis. So I reviewed this article looking way back from the beginning of our content analysis. So again, the categories of those 6 categories, this one utilizes extrapolations, and specifically the extrapolations of trends. They showed in their literature review, they show very much the trend of what was discussed in the literature on this specific topic, on the business schools, and how they're correlating with what we students need. The sampling style that was utilized by this article was convenience. So they sampled schools that were near their geographic location, which was, of course, convenient for them. The coding utilized in this article was decision schemes. So the very first thing they did was they took job descriptions and they coded them to determine which business license or certificates and which technical skills were, in fact, required for someone to be considered for those jobs. They then looked at student resumes, course syllabi, and required textbooks and analyzed those to determine if those original codes, the licenses and the technical skills, were in fact present in those items. So first they analyzed the job description to find out the license, certificates, and technical skills needed. Then they used those codes and analyze student resumes, course syllabi, and required textbooks. So the analysis was done in comparing to the previous. So then, as for reliability of this analysis, they tried to touch on replicability reliability. Because the analysis was done in comparison to a previous article, but it was compared to a previous article, not a previous content analysis, so it was not in fact a test-retest situation, so therefore we don't have guaranteed reliability. And the validity that was utilized here was social validity, in that we're discussing the the disconnect between business schools and the business community, and that this has been a discussion here, as our extrapolations of trends has shown. This has been a discussion here for, in fact, about 30 years now. So then let's talk about some improvements here that I believe that this article could do. So there's one thing that really I did not understand how they obtained was the student resumes. Nowhere in there did they discuss how they obtained those. They did not say whether they in fact requested them from students. When they did their job search, they actually pulled those off of search websites such as Monster. Did they get student resumes by pulling them off of Monster as well? We don't know. Another big thing that I disagree with that they stated was in there that they stated that interviews were not done of the students to find out whether they did not in fact have these licenses or skills, or whether they just did not include them on their resume. So they did no interview to actually find out whether the students truly knew any of these technical skills and just forgot to put them on their resume, or whether they truly did not know. And then in the very next paragraph, after they stated that they didn't interview the students, they then stated that seniors are not proficient in QuickBooks and thus gave no mention of it on their resumes. Again, if you didn't do an interview, you cannot claim that seniors are not proficient in a skill, because you don't know whether they are in fact not proficient in it, and that's why they didn't put it on their resume, or they just forgot to put it on their resume. So that whole paragraph where they stated that, I don't think it was worded correctly. I think that improvements could be made. And then they talked about how they utilized a lot of business bachelor degrees in students, and they did not in fact utilize as many of the masters when they did this analysis. And yes, I do think that this is an important analysis for undergraduate students, but I actually think that this analysis would be even more important for graduate students. So I really would have appreciated seeing more analysis of actual MBA programs and students. And lastly, in their literature review, they state that various publications in fact give annual rankings of business schools, but they only analyze schools that were in fact close to them. So I think that this research would have been more complete if they looked at those results of the annual reviews and pulled top-ranking schools and analyzed them. So I think that there's definitely some improvements that could be made, and maybe not necessarily for them to do, but something that future analysts can in fact do on this same topic. So recap here. Today we discussed designing an analysis, and we talked about text-driven, problem-driven, and method-driven entry points into that analysis. We talked about writing a research proposal, writing a research report, and then we looked at that sample to see how it in fact followed the research proposal and research report. And really what I would like you to remember today is how to write a research proposal and how to write a research report, because these two are going to be very important to you. The proposal in gaining your sponsors, and the report in showing your peers what you came up with. So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Is there any questions?